मैम रेवती और कृष्णा जैसे ही अब ज्वाइन नहीं करेगी, उनका कुछ एग्जाम से इसलिए मैसेज डाला है।
ओके, थैंक यू। Good evening, Shreyansh.
Good evening, ma'am.
What happened, Shreyansh? You had some exams or something? You didn't join for the last two classes?
Last class I was there. Last class I had gone to the university fair, so I came home late. That's why.
You went to the university fair, so you missed your class.
Yeah, I came home late. That's why.
Even I had gone. You
I
shouldn't
had
be
gone after
yeah,
school.
so that's okay, but you have to make sure that you don't miss the TOEFL classes because it's going to be just one session each task. Yeah. So if you miss something, then it's going to be a problem. So did you go through what you missed last time?
No, ma'am.
Shares, can we have your video on?
Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So, Shreyans, I have shared the PPT on the drive. Make sure you go through it. So, last time we did speaking integrated task 3. Yeah?
Yes.
So, if you just download the PPT and go through it. And if you have any doubts, then next class you can just message me, then we can join a little early and then I can go through your doubts. Okay, good evening, Kesar. Any doubts from last class?
Good evening, ma'am. No doubts.
No doubts? Did you practice again?
Yeah.
Did you get them right?
Yeah.
Was it better?
Right. Yeah, better than what I tried. Yeah, in class.
So, what did you learn? With practice, it gets better?
Yes, definitely.
Definitely? Okay. So, I'll now what you will do is all the tasks in your study material we've done in class, you will be doing, so how many of those tasks did you do? How many of those exercises rather?
I have done 7 questions from task 1, 3 from task 2. And yesterday I tried 2 from task 3.
Okay, great. And I had given you the reference of the Toefl app. So you can try those for real-time experience. Yeah. Okay. So Krishna Revati is not joining in. So Shreyansh, did you have any doubts from the previous task?
No, ma'am.
There is task 2?
No doubts.
Okay. So did you practice any?
Yeah, I did.
How was it?
It was better than what I started with.
Yeah. So you will keep practicing. Practice with the Toefl Go app, and maybe after that I will share the speaking task remains the same. So I'll share some exercises for the speaking task once we get done with task 4. So when you are doing the Toefl Go app, now you will be able to do all the speaking tasks together, one after the other. That's what you have to do. So randomly you can practice, especially independent, but when you are doing it from the app, try to do all the entire speaking section together. So that will give you practice of moving from one task to another task flawlessly. Right? Good evening, Arushi.
Good evening, ma'am.
So Arushi, I was just asking whether you had practiced. Did you do the tasks again?
Yes, ma'am. I will send the recording to you.
Okay. Any difference you found? Was it better this
Yes, ma'am,
time?
it was better this time.
It was better this time. Good. So have you found your strategy?
Yes, ma'am.
Hmm? Are you using your template?
Yes.
Okay, good. Kesar, did you use a template?
Yes, ma'am.
You found your template, which is going to be with you for every task?
Yes.
Okay, great. Very good. So today we'll move on to task 4. So before we move on to task 4, just tell me, what is task 2? Speaking task 2? Shreyansh?
Announcement,
Yes, Kesar.
university announcement, and a conversation between two
Conversation.
people.
Right. What is task 1? Shreyansh? What is speaking task 1?
Independent speaking.
Independent speaking. So what is your format for independent speaking? Shreyansh, can you tell me what is your format for independent speaking?
We start with, in my opinion.
In my opinion. Then, what's your first
Then,
sentence?
because of two main reasons.
So you paraphrase the question, the main point of the question, and say because of two main reasons. And then when you give your reasons, what do you do?
Firstly and secondly.
Firstly, secondly. And your points, how do you elaborate your points?
Example and explanation.
Explanation, example. Very good. Arushi, in task number 2, what is your format? Speaking task 2.
In my opinion, and then
Excuse me. I'm talking about speaking task 2. What is speaking task 2?
independent speak.
Task 2 of speaking. See, I had told you, you should remember what is task 1, what is task 2, what is task 3, what is task 4. So what is task 2?
First campus situation.
Campus situation, conversation. Yeah?
Yes.
Announcement, conversation. So what is the format of your answer?
According to the announcement,
Yeah.
and then there are two reasons why he or she supports or opposes or
Right.
has mixed opinion.
And then you go on to first opinion, second opinion, and maybe there could also be a situation where only one of those points is discussed more, like we had in the romance languages task.
Yes.
So according to the question, you will frame your answer. Okay.
Yes.
Kesar, what is the task? What is the format for task 3?
The passage introduces the concept of, it states that, then the professor elaborates on the topic or term, explaining that, and
Explaining
then additional
with examples.
with firstly, and additionally the professor says that.
Or maybe if you can't differentiate between the first and second, you just explain what the professor has said, and then you can conclude with, these are the ways he explains the concept.
Yes.
Right? Very good. So now we move on to task 4. Task 4, you don't have anything to read. You will listen to a lecture and you will speak. It becomes a little more complicated because the lecture here will be a little longer than the task 3 lecture, and you have no reference point to figure out what the lecture is going to be about. Yeah, so taking notes properly in this is very crucial. Yeah. Yes, it's coming. So this is task number 4, which is an academic course. And the question is about summarizing the lecture with focus on a certain thing which the question asks you to do. Certain aspect of the lecture you have to focus on. So no reading passages for this. You just listen to an audio clip. And again, the audio clip is not going to be played twice. It's going to be played only once. After that, you don't have any access to the audio clip. And your question is about summarizing the lecture and focusing on a certain concept. Yeah, or summarizing a certain concept itself in the lecture. So now it's about 90 to 120 seconds will be the lecture, quite long, say 1.5 to 2 minutes. It could be an excerpt from a bigger, so they will tell you, now listen to a lecture from dash class. So that you take note of and then you move on. So it is, so what is this testing you on? Whether you can extract the main points and summary from a big lecture. Now, if your lecture is about 2 minutes and you are speaking for 1 minute explaining a certain concept in the lecture, you have to be able to pick out the key concepts, key examples, and put them together in your answer. So here you get a preparation time of 20 seconds, not 30 seconds. In task 2 and 3, you get 30 seconds. Here you get 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds is your response time. Yeah, that much you have to remember. So if we talk about it is an academic lecture, what can it be on? Just about anything. It could be life sciences, social sciences, anthropology, history. It could be geography, it could be business studies, it could be just economics, anything, right? But nothing which you need to know about or need to have any prior knowledge about, because your answer will be based just on what the lecture says. No extra information required, no opinion required, right? So if we talk about the structure of the lecture, it will have like most lectures, a short introduction and a concept will be defined or a problem can be talked about. So the lecture basically introduces a phenomena or a concept, goes on to explain different aspects of the concept with examples. So that's you expect from any of these lectures. So concept, what the concept is, different aspects, maybe two aspects of the concept and examples relating to each aspect. That's what. So if you keep that in mind, it becomes easy to take down notes, right? And the question when we come to, it usually begins something like this: using points and examples from the lecture, explain whatever the concept is. So an example would be something like this: using points and examples from the lecture, explain the two major factors of product quality and how their role in consumer decision making has changed. Yeah. So if you see, using points and examples from the lecture, explain the two major factors, means you are summarizing what the lecturer has said and going on to something specific. So role in consumer decision making has changed, that will be something specific. So you are not analyzing it, you are just picking out points from the lecture and summarizing the lecture. That's all you have to do. You don't have to add any points of your own or any opinion of your own. So, of course, taking notes will be very important. So you write down the details, and yes, examples are important. So here, take presenting important information from the lecture is crucial to your topic development for the scores. Yeah. If maybe your format is good, your language is also very good, no grammatical mistakes, but you missed out on important points, then you will lose out on your scores. Yeah. So now the template of your answer would be like the question is asking you to explain the concepts that the professor is talking about. So first thing you do is summarize the concepts. And so you can say in the lecture, the professor talks about dash. He or she gives 2 or 3 examples to illustrate the concept. Or you can say the professor discusses dash in the lecture giving examples. Whichever is most simple and easy to remember, you go with that. Right? So I think the professor discusses dash in the lecture giving example. This will be easy to remember. Or throughout the lecture, professor talks about dash and how it, whatever. Next, what you do? You go into the details, yeah, of how the professor illustrates the concept. So now so you're given the details after this. So how do you give in the details? First point, you pick up the first point. After you've given the broad idea of the lecture, you pick out the specific points. So first point, first the professor focuses on, and then you explain it. So this will be explanation. Or firstly, the professor talks about. So now this will be a repetition. If you think that, okay, you can't remember immediately, you can expand a little bit. So essentially what the professor is saying is that. So you don't really use this always unless you get stuck. So that's just a way of giving yourself a little time to think. Yeah. If you're sure, you can go on to the point. Then so remember there is a point and an example to explain the point. So the first example the professor gives is, and then you go on to explain how that example explains. Then when you come to the second point, secondly, thirdly, whatever, if there's a third point, the professor goes on to say that, you can use it that way. The next point the professor makes is, that is easy to remember. So you can begin with the first the professor focuses on, and the next point the professor makes is that, or the professor also explains if it is a continuation of the same point. And then you go on to another example. Yeah, whatever example the professor has taken up. Or if it is the professor using the example to explain the point, the professor uses another example to explain the point, and then you go on to explain the example. That's what your template will be. Do you want the template again? So first thing you do is introduce your point or introduce the topic. Then you go on to the specific points. The first point with example, second point with example. That's your structure. Right? Shreyansh? Got the structure?
Yes, ma'am.
So now when this question is asking you to summarize something and focus on a certain part, what do? You will be talking about something that is directly from the lecture. Now this is a warning. Own opinion is not asked for. So Don't talk about and don't add any points on your own which is not there in the lecture. Right? Missing out on a point is a different thing. And if you think that, okay, you missed out a point, you can make up a point on your own, that's not allowed. Clear? So if you have 2 points that the professor has given you, talk about 2 points. If there are 3 points in the lecture, talk about 3 points. Right? Okay, this is very important. So, and you don't really need a conclusion unless you think that you haven't put in an introduction. So if you are very good at speaking, you can format it in a different way and you can use a conclusion, but not really required. But the most important information should be there. So begin with the most important information, then go on to the lesser the information which is less important. So now how do you know which is most important? In a lecture, usually which is the most important information? Topics and subtopics. And when you come to the examples, those are also important. Now, suppose the lecturer has given one example to explain a particular concept, and this goes on with a second example to explain the same concept. Maybe you couldn't take notes on the second example on the same concept. So at least say that uses another example to explain the same concept. Yeah, that will also do. But if you've got the notes, if you've got the example, it will be good. Yeah, and always keep your pace natural. I think that you will be mastering while you speak. So overall template, you can use something like this. The lecture is about dash. The professor uses 2 examples to demonstrate X, say the concept. Then the lecture explains the term by giving 2 examples or an example. The first example is, so this is an alternate. You can either use this or the second one. Then you go on to the first example is, or firstly she explains with the help of this example. Then the second example. And then in summary, if you want to give, if you want to conclude. If you have time, you conclude. Otherwise, you can stick to the 2 points. Right? So for now, you can write your template, whichever one you want to use. Stick to one template, one form. Say the lecture is about, then in the first example, in the second example, and then summarize. Summarizing is optional. Right, Shreyansh? You've written down your template more or less, which you can use when you are speaking.
Yes.
Now here, when you are speaking, like we said in the previous class also, transition words are important to give a flow to your speaking. So if there's a contrast, you use however. If say the first example, you can say first of all, the first point. Yeah. So if you are dealing with the first point, you can say first of all. Then the lecturer uses 2 examples. The lecturer explains this with the help of an example or just for example. And in conclusion, you can say, if you're putting in a conclusion, in the second example, you can say in addition or moreover. And if you are going to conclude the exam, now another thing, each point can have a conclusion if the lecture is framed that way. So if the lecturer says that this example explains this part of the concept, then you put in a conclusion for that point, a particular point conclusion. Not overall conclusion, but conclusion for the particular point if the lecture is that way. Got it? So this is just a recap. You can go through it when from the PPT. So examples are very important. That is one thing you have to know. So point and example from the lecture you have to take down. Yeah. Then if you use your template, it becomes easy. Use transitions. So now when you take down the notes, what are you, now we discussed what the lecture format will be. So when you're taking down the notes, what do you do? First, take down the topic. So you can have your format ready. Topic, definition, there is the explanation of the topic. Example 1, details of it. Example 2, details of it. This is what you will get. Maybe there could be a little variation here and there, but more or less, this is how you can organize your notes so that when you are speaking, you know the lecture is about this. Firstly, the professor uses an example. The professor explains this with the help of an example, and you know what the first example is. And you go on to the explanation. So here you will get your explanation. Then you will get your example when you have written down example 2, and you get your explanation from the details. So if you have organized your notes properly, you will get an organized response. If you write your notes haphazardly, then you will be searching for your points. Where is the next point? What did I write next? Right? And yeah, not that always the lecture is properly organized. Sometimes there could be a shift from one example to another example. Maybe there will be 2 examples to explain the first point and 1 example for the second point. But more or less it will be organized. Right? So when you come to task 4, while your instructions are being given, you will write down the notes taking format. Yeah, Shreyansh?
Yes.
So now maybe say if their lecture is something like this, this is just a rough of the notes taken. Now the 2, you can also do it this way, the 2 concepts maybe or 2 examples, how say how fish survive in dark ocean. Maybe that was a topic. So first example was of the spooky fish, second example was of the lantern fish, then points related to spooky fish, point related to lantern fish. It's easy to make out what is what. You can do it in columns, or you can do it in just a flow chart or points one after the other. So when you're taking down notes and the lecture is quite fast, sometimes it becomes a little difficult to differentiate between the 2 points. So you can take down your notes in a flow. Yeah. Now, when it comes to your response, again, time yourself. First 10 seconds can go to the introduction. What is the topic about? Then about 20 seconds, 20 or 21 seconds, or maximum 22 seconds for your first point. And then about another 21 to 22 seconds for your second point. And if you have time left, maybe if you take about 12 seconds here, then you won't have time left for a conclusion. So if you have about 4 seconds left, you can put in a conclusion. Right? Yes, good evening, Ayan.
Good evening, ma'am.
Did you just join?
No, I joined like 5-10 minutes before.
I think I didn't see you. Okay. So, and then your conclusion, if you have time and you want to wrap up, a conclusion would be good, but it's not compulsory. If you miss the conclusion, you are not going to be penalized for it. Right? So this is your structure again. So in 60 seconds, 10 seconds for your introduction, about 21 to 22 seconds for each point. And if you are left with time, about 3 to 4 seconds for a conclusion. That's all you can do. Yeah. So we can move on to a task now. Are you ready? So you have your pencil paper ready? So your directions will be written for you and they will also read it out. You will now listen to a part of a lecture. You will then be asked a question about it. After you hear the question, give yourself 20 seconds to prepare your response. Then record yourself speaking for 60 seconds. Yeah. So ready? I'm playing the track. Let me know if you can hear it. I did share the sound. I hopefully.
Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
If a consumer has
Okay. Can you hear clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
to choose between two products,
Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
if a consumer has to choose between two products, what determines the choice? Assume that someone, a purchaser, is choosing between two products that cost the same, okay? If people have a choice between two identically priced products, which one will they choose? They choose the one they think is of higher quality, of course. But what does it mean for a product to be a high-quality product? Well, business analysts usually speak of two major factors of quality. One factor is reliability, and the other is what we call features. So reliability. What's reliability? Well, a product is reliable if it works the way we expect it to work, if it can go a reasonable amount of time without needing repairs. If a product, a car for example, doesn't work the way it should and needs repairs too soon, we say it's unreliable. So product reliability means basically the absence of defects or problems that you weren't expecting. It used to be that when people thought about product quality, they thought mainly about reliability. Today, it's different. People do still care about reliability, don't get me wrong. It's just that manufacturing standards are now so high that, we'll take cars for example, today. Today's cars are very reliable. So reliability is important, but it's not going to be the deciding factor. So if reliability isn't the deciding factor anymore, what is? Features, all those extras, the things a product has that aren't really necessary, but that make it easier to use or that make it cool. For example, new cars today are loaded with features like electric windows, sunroofs, air conditioning, stereos, and so forth. When people are comparing products today, they look at features because reliability is pretty much equal across the board. And that's why manufacturers include so many features in their products.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain the two major factors of product quality and how their role in consumer decision-making has changed.
Okay. So did you get your points from the lecture?
Listen to part.
So that's your question. Using points and examples from the lecture, explain the two major factors of product quality and how their role in consumer decision-making has changed. So what's your focus over here?
Consumer decision making.
Yeah. So first you will be summarizing the two factors. And then you will be focusing on how it has, the consumer decision making has changed. Right? That's what the conclusion of the lecture also was. Today, what do the consumers look for? Right? So, Ayan, what did you write down in your notes? Just read out the whatever you have written, even if it is just one word, half a word,
First,
whatever.
I wrote business class with the class with it.
Hmm.
Consumer choose to prod some cost, which will choose high quality,
Hmm.
reliability, works as expected, rare repairing, absence of defects or issue. Today's cars are more reliable. Features, easier to use, cool, feature packed, car sunroof, etc.
Hmm.
I wrote that.
Okay. And the last bit?
No.
Okay. So more or less you can summarize and conclude. Yeah. So Shreyans, did you get all your points?
Yes.
Hmm?
Yes.
So now you have your template. Hmm?
Yes. Ma'am.
So you have 2 points. Summarize the 2 points and then you will frame your, now when you are framing your answer, you will frame it according to what the question is asking you. Yeah. First, you will talk about the 2 major factors and then what determines consumer decision making and how it has changed. Right? So you can just about prepare your answer a little bit and then we go on to your responses. So just when you have your points, you can just mark your points as in what will your first point be or how will you begin. Then the first example, second example. Here in this case there are 2 points explained with the help of examples. Yeah. So the 2 factors are this and this. First factor, second factor, and how the second factor changes consumer decision making. That's what your answer will be? Okay. So think about your answer. Anyone ready? Ayan, are you there? So are you ready? I think that's about the enough time to get here. You get just 20 seconds, remember. You don't get 30 seconds as in task 2 and 3. Okay, who wants to speak? Anyone volunteers or I'll just pick somebody at random? No one wants to volunteer. Okay, Arushi, you want to give it a try? Okay, thank you. You may begin.
The lecture is about consumer choice. The professor uses 2 examples to demonstrate it. The lecturer first explains if the consumer has to choose between 2 identically priced products, which one they would choose. She says that it depends on 2 factors, reliability and features. Reliability means that the product works fine without any defects. She gives examples of a car. If the car needs needs frequent repairs, then it is unreliable. The second factor is features. And this factor is not really necessary to make a product high quality, but makes the product appear cool. She gives examples of new cars which are full of various features such as electronic windows, sunroofs, air conditioning, and stereos.
Is it? So how long did you take?
I think I took longer time.
We took 1 minute 40 seconds. Yeah. So now what you have to practice is summarizing your points. Right? So, and how will you summarize your points? You can focus on the question. What is the question asking you? Explain the two major factors of product quality. So you can begin with the lecturer explains two major factors of product quality, which are what?
Reliability and features.
Reliability and features. So that's your introduction. Done. She explains it with the help of examples. For example, then you can move on to the factor of reliability. People expect cars to be reliable. For example, she takes the example of cars. So you don't have to go on to first explain the whole point and then come to the example. You can just use the example to explain the point. So in that, when you do that, you have covered the point, plus you have saved time. Right? Got it, Arushi? Okay, let's see. Shreyansh, can I have your response?
Yes, ma'am.
So I hope you will be able to implement what we just spoke about.
Yes.
Okay, go on.
In the lecture, the professor talks about how a purchaser purchase a product. It is and gives two examples to illustrate the point. Firstly, the professor says that a product is a purchaser chooses a product based on two factors, which is reliability and features. A product is reliable when it is working as expected, uh, and it is the absence of defects. He gives an example that cars today are reliable, and if they need frequent repairs, then they are not. And features is not a necessary part of a product being high quality, but it makes the product look cool. The professor gives the example that new cars these days are equipped with radio, air conditioner, electric doors, etc. Yeah, then
That's it.
yes.
So do you think your answer was good enough? What can be improved? Okay, when you are speaking, you can't really figure out what you said. Right? Can you?
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. Kesar, can you analyze Shreyan's answer?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I didn't actually hear this because I was preparing my own answer.
You had 20 seconds to prepare. I had told you to listen to everybody. So I expect you to listen to everybody's. So Arushi, what do you think of Shreyan's answer?
Ma'am, it could have been more concise.
It could have been concise, right? Okay, one major problem with, that was with Arushi's answer and Shreyan's answer. When you began, you said the lecturer explains two examples. Does she explain two examples or she explains two factors?
Two factors.
Two factors, right? Shreyansh?
Yes, ma'am.
It's two factors. What is the topic? So when you talk about the topic, it is two factors that determine consumer choice. Right? So two factors which are reliability and features. That would be your introduction. Now, Shreyans, you made the same mistake as Arushi. You started explaining and then you went on to the example of the car and explained again. So what you did was you repeated the explanation. Instead, to make it concise, what can you do? Go to the, now you stated the two features, then go straight away to the example, right? To explain the point. Okay, let's see if Kesar can do that. Kesar,
Yes, ma'am.
go on.
In the lecture, the professor talks about consumer choice using two major factors. The two major factors are reliability and features. The professor defines reliability using an example of car, which is which has defects and issues and needs to be repaired frequently, which is an example where reliability is not quite no.
What you're talking about?
Yeah.
You're talking about something that the lecturer didn't even say.
Yeah.
Hmm? So you've gone completely off track. Can you come back on track?
I need some time.
No, you don't have time. Try it. See, if you don't try, you will not know how to frame your answer. Because you are not going to get so much of time. And you are not going to get the same topic. You're going to get a completely unknown topic. So for an unknown topic, you have to try. If you don't try, you will not be able to do it.
Ma'am, but what if in first point I didn't give the example of car and then explain in the second point?
See, in the first point, first of all, you said reliability means the car is not, there are defects. What do you mean by?
Like I wanted
It
to
should be
explain.
free. It should be free of defects. You said the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So your point was absolutely wrong. Okay. Can you try it again? From the beginning.
In the lecture, the professor talks about consumer choice using two major factors. The two major factors are reliability and features. The professor defines reliability using an example of car which has no defects and issues and works expected by the consumer. Secondly, the professor talks about features which are an extra element to the choice of the consumer. It gives an example of cars like today's cars have electrical windows, sunroofs, and air conditioning. And in summary, the lecturer says that features have become more of part like equal to the reliability.
Equal to reliability.
Yeah.
Is that what she said?
Oh, I don't remember. I have written equal to over there.
So if reliability, so what was the point she said? Anyone who wants to correct Kesar? Arushi, do you want to correct Kesar?
Ma'am, I didn't note that.
You didn't know that? So given that the cars are reliable nowadays, right? The professor said the cars are reliable nowadays and work as expected. So what is the deciding factor then? In that case, nowadays the deciding factor is features. So that's what answers the question here. There is how their role in consumer decision making has changed. What has changed? The deciding factor has changed from reliability to features. So features is the deciding factor. That is how you could conclude your answer, right? Ayan, I think you went missing in the middle. Did you get your points? Can you answer?
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
The lecturer discusses about consumer choice based on two major factors. The professor uses cars as an example to explain the topic. The two factors are reliability and quality. Reliability refers to the product working as expected and needs less maintenance like modern cars, as manufacturing standards have grown to be higher than earlier. The second factor is features, which makes more of an impact on the consumer's choice after as reliability is equal across the board. So manufacturers pack features and make the car look cool and appealing to the consumer.
Okay, so that's it. You still had about 8 seconds left. Yeah. So means when you have 60 seconds, you can explain a little more. So yours was concise. You had the advantage of all the discussion we did. And you did implement it. Only thing you could explain a little more on what is reliability and why the factors are more important. Yeah, you could expand on that. Okay, Kesar, one thing in your answer, you said the professor defines these factors or defines reliability with the help of example. Is that a correct sentence structure?
No.
What should it be?
The professor gives an example of car to define reliability.
You're still missing the point. Do you use an example to define?
No, to explain.
Explain. Right? So you can say in this case, the professor is not defining reliability. If you say with the help of examples, explains. So you have to be very careful. So these are the things which the examiner will catch you on. Maybe you don't realize you are speaking, you are trying to format your sentences. You won't realize what you said. But if you record yourself and listen to it again, you will realize where you are going wrong. Right? Okay. So we can move on to another question. So this was a template. So in this particular question that we just did, your points would have been two different versions of the cost the same. Buyers will look at quality. So first it began, okay, this was a point which everyone missed out on. If two versions cost the same, why are we talking about two factors? If they cost the same, what are the factors that decide consumer decision making? Right? An important point that we missed out. Okay, then consumers try to figure out items quality. They look at reliability and features. Everyone have that. Now, what are features? Features are extra things that make it more fun. That's what the notes were. According to Professor Byers, used to look at reliability as a main factor. However, see, we use a transition that it has changed over time. However, in modern times, tough government looks made all products reliable. So all products are reliable, you can say, even if you have missed out the government rules. The teacher or professor gives cars as an example. Car makers all have to meet the same standards. So instead of buyers focusing on the features, the buyers focus on the features like air conditioning or sunroofs. These things influence buyers most nowadays. So these days, sellers give products lots of extra features. So these were the points covered. And if you have written your points in this way, you can frame your answer also properly. Yeah. So this is just an outline of the answer. So either you begin with the features, and so you can begin with the factors. Sorry. You begin with the factors, move on to explain each factor. So we have reliability and features, explain reliability, explain features. Then you say why features are more important. Yeah. So either way, you can explain the two factors, then move on to the example, or explain each factor with the help of example. I think explaining each factor with the help of examples becomes easy, because that's how the lecture is formatted, right? And if you think you can carry it on, then you explain the two features, two factors, and then use the example to say how the consumer behavior has changed in the modern times or the present times. Both ways your answer is correct, right? So you will try this again later, record yourself and send it to me. Okay. So now we move on to our next question. So you will now listen to a part of a lecture from a literature class. You will then be asked a question about it. You will hear the question, give yourself 20 seconds to prepare your response, then record yourself speaking for 60 seconds. So while this was being read out, what did you do? Ayan?
Took down the format.
Format. So what is your format? First will be your topic. What is it about? Now we know it is a literature class, but we don't know what about literature. Then your first point, example. Second point, example. That's what you require? Okay, move on to the lecture.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a literature class.
In the 8th century BCE, a legendary author named Homer wrote two epic poems. You probably know them already, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're fascinating poems, really, partly because they give us such a clear window to the culture of the time. But what culture or what period of Greek history was Homer describing? His own era or an earlier one? It's an interesting question, but it's very likely there's no real answer. You see, Homer was working in the oral tradition. Before he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey down, poems were told and retold by generations of storytellers. Each generation added details to the poems, so it's likely that these poems are actually this. They're an interesting mixture of historical details about a bunch of different time periods. So let me give you a couple of examples. Here's one. Homer describes helmets made out of boar tusks. Well, just these kinds of helmets have actually been discovered in sites dating back to the 2nd millennium BCE in Greece. They weren't used in later time periods. That's a pretty clear indication, right? So clearly Homer's poems preserved some authentic details about the distant past, and some would argue that's the era Homer intended to write about. But then we take a look at another detail and it's a bit more nebulous. Homer describes chariots, horse-drawn wagons carrying warriors into battle. He describes them as simply carrying troops on and off the battlefield. That might be how chariots were used in Homer's time, sure, but in earlier history, the time when those helmets might have been used, say, they were used in battles themselves. The chariots, that is. So, this is a good example of Homer adding details from his own world into the poems.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain why the professor thinks there is no real answer to the question of what period of history Homer described.
So that's your question. Using points and examples from the talk, explain why the professor thinks there is no real answer to the question, or what period of history Homer describes. Or Homer described. Right? So now if we look at the points that we have got. So what was the topic about? The lecture is about what? Shreyansh, what is the lecture about?
Homer's poems.
What about Homer's poems?
At what time were they written?
Time period, yeah. Any particular detail?
Homer wrote Iliad and Odyssey.
Yeah. Anything else? Why was there a question about the time period? Now, the Iliad and the Odyssey were epics, and something the author said, which makes it confusing to determine which period of time Homer actually wrote. Was it his own time, or was it talking about time which was earlier? The professor said something about oral tradition. Yeah, did you get that in your note? This was the introductory section before the examples came in. So any detail about the oral tradition? Arushi, did you get anything from here?
That the poems mostly describe the distant past, and he gave example of chariots used.
No, I'm talking about the oral tradition. Anything about the oral tradition? Why did the...
Not catch that. There was too much information. I could not write.
Okay. Anyone got this point about oral tradition? Kesar? No? So oral tradition was mentioned in... So Shreyas, did you get this point?
Yes, ma'am, that the poems were told and retold.
Yeah, they were retold, and some facts could have been changed over time. Yeah. So mixture of details, and spoke about different periods. So we don't know exactly. So then there were two examples. Yeah. Example number one was about, Ayan, what was example number one?
Example one was helmets made of boar tusks found in archaeology sites.
Right. So what was the detail of that? Whether it was Homer's time or earlier? Okay, sir, do you have details about the boar tusk helmet?
They were preserved as not intended, not
Preserved.
used.
Were they used? When were they used?
Not used. 2
Yeah.
millennial BC something.
Yeah. So that is, it was used before Homer's time. So we don't really, so maybe he intended to write about the past. That's what we get from this particular point. Okay. What was example 2, Arushi?
Ma'am, it was about the chariots used by the troops on and off battlefield, which was there during Homer's time.
Right. So and anything else? Any other point about the chariots? Ayan, do you have a point? Any additional point about the chariots?
I just wrote carrying troops into battles and using chariots in battle.
Okay. Carrying troops on and off the battlefield was in Homer's time. Right? And used in battle was before Homer's time. Right? Shreyans, am I correct?
Ma'am, they were used during Homer's time.
They were used in Homer's time so the purposes were different. They were used in both times. During Homer's time, they were used to carry troops on and off the field. And
yes.
earlier, they were actually used in battle.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the difference. So what did the professor conclude with?
That we are not actually sure about which era he intended to write about.
Yeah. So which era we don't really know because he used different informations. And these are the two examples the professor gave. Right? So you've got your details. Now to answer the question, we have to focus on no real answer about what period of history Homer described. Right? So you can put your points together with a template to answer. So who is ready with an answer? Anyone ready with an answer? Ayan? Not ready?
No.
How many more seconds you require? Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds. So you can use a template like this. The lecture is about the professor, and then you give details about what it is about. And then lecturer uses two examples to demonstrate this. In the first example, and then in the second example, or firstly and secondly, both ways. And then you can go on with therefore. Right? Okay, let's see. Shreyans, I think you are ready.
Ma'am, I'm not sure.
Doesn't matter. Just give it a try. I'm not marking you for it. This is not a test.
Okay.
Okay,
the
you may.
lecture is
Yes.
the lecture is about what time period did Homer write. Homer used to write Iliad and Odysseus, which gave a clear window to the culture. The professor uses two examples to demonstrate this. In the first example, He talks about helmets which were made of bow tusks, and they were in the time period of second millennium, which was before Homer's time, and it and Homer used to preserve the authentic details. Then in the second example, he talks about the chariots, which was during Homer's time, which were used to carry troops on and off the battlefield, and also before Homer's time, where they were actually used in the battlefield, and therefore uh, the professor says that it was not clear at which time Homer used to write.
So, Shreyansh, you went on with, um, so you began with what Homer wrote, but did you tell us what the main topic of the lecture is?
I said that the lecture is about what
You said
time period.
lecture is about Homer's works. But that which time period the professor says that which time period he wrote is questionable. That is what you should have in your introduction, apart from introducing him, right? And did you get all the details correct?
I think
So with each example, more or less you got, but you needed a little more clarity, right? So you can work on clarity. Okay, let's see. Ayan, can I have your answer?
While noting down, I did not get that many details, so it's
Doesn't matter, whatever you have got down. Let me see what you've got. You can frame your answer with whatever you've got.
okay. Uh, the lecture is about Greek history, literature of Greek history. The professor uses two examples of a helmet made of bow tusks and chariots in war to demonstrate that uh,
Hmm? What is the main purpose of the lecture?
to determine if we can find out what time Homer is writing about in his poems.
Right. So that was the main thing you have to begin with. Right? So the professor talks about Homer's works and the fact that about like Homer talks from Homer's work, we get an idea of the culture and the period, but we are not sure about which period he actually wrote about, his own period or in some other period, right? So that is how you would begin. And then you would go on to the two examples. So you have to actually follow the structure of the lecture. Whatever the lecturer said, follow the structure of the lecture, you just summarize it. That's what you have to do. But that's how even the structure of the lecture is exactly that there is no real answer. Two examples to show that there is no real answer. Right? Okay, let's see. Kesar,
Yes, ma'am.
can you give me your answer?
Ma'am, I don't have all the points.
Doesn't matter, whatever you have. We discuss the points. We anyway discuss the points. So you have your points.
But the introduction part I couldn't. Like examples I have.
I just gave you the introduction. Give it a try. No problem. We learn from our mistakes. Doesn't matter if you mess up. It's absolutely okay if you mess up. No problem. So you can begin now.
The professor discusses about the poems written by Homer in the 8th century BC, giving a brief about the culture and period of the history, the professor uses two examples to describe the same, explain the same. First, the professor talks about the helmets which were used before the second millennium BC and were preserved. And secondly, he talks about the chariots which were used to carry troops on and off, and before the Homer's period, they were used in battles. This is why we couldn't figure out what period of history Homer described in his poems.
So more or less, you've got your points. Just a few details here and there you missed out on. So if you take your notes carefully, now your lectures will be complicated. Yeah. And you have to be able to take your notes, and the rest you will recall from memory. So the keywords, if you have written down, you will be able to recall, okay, the lecture said something else about this. So when you get those 20 seconds to prepare, a few additional words you put down, whatever you can recall.
Yeah.
Right? So more or less it was okay. You can improve on this.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Arushi, let's have your answer.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, Arushi.
The lecture is about Homer's works and whether we can figure out which era his works are written in. The lecturer uses two examples. Firstly, he talks about the helmets made of boar tusks which were found in archaeological sites. They were preserved and were used before Homer's time. Secondly, he mentions the chariots used by troops on battlefields, which during his time but they were also used before Homer's time. In summary, we can't really tell if Homer intended to write in his era or the previous era.
Write in or write about?
Write about his era or his previous era.
Yeah. So you've got more or less, you've got your points, but some details are missing. Like when you spoke about boar tusks and they were found in archaeological sites, was that more important? Or there was something else which was more important? Like Homer mentions helmets made of boar tusks, which have been found to be used in the second millennium BC. So from here, what we can we figure out about his works? He was talking about a period before his own. Yeah, that's what is important. Now, when we are talking about the chariots, what is important? The comparison. Yeah, the two purposes. Homer talks about chariots carrying troops on and off the field. Right? Whereas chariots were actually used in battle in the previous era.
Yes.
So from this point, we can say that he is talking about his own era. So there are two. Now, if you see, there are two examples. One proves that he is talking about a previous era. There's a boar tusks. The second example of chariot proves that he is talking about his own era. So that's where the confusion arises, whether Homer wrote about his own era or he wrote about a previous era. Right?
Yes,
That's the clarity we require. So no real answer to the question, what period of history Homer described. Right? So his different works had various details which belong to various eras. So we can say in conclusion that it was difficult to figure out which era Homer wrote about. Got it?
Yes.
So the points are there, the examples are there. You need details about the examples, which would explain. Now, when you're talking about the examples, why does the lecturer use examples? To explain the point or to explain the contradiction. So that needs to come out in your answer. Not just stating the examples, but why the lecturer uses those examples. That should be clear, right? So when you are taking down the notes, your response should actually be according to the question. So here the question is whether there is a real answer to the question of which period Homer described. So which period Homer described, that contrast. So you can talk about the first example and say that from the first example, the lecturer says that it shows that he was talking about, he intended to talk about a period in the past. Then when you come to the second example, what is it? A contrast. How would you begin a contrast? However, However, the lecturer takes the example of chariots and then you go on, or you can just begin with the lecturer uses a second example of chariots, and then you can mention that during Homer's period, Homer describes chariots as taking troops on and off the battlefield, which depicts the history of his period. However, chariots were used in real battle in an earlier period. So we can say he's talking about his own period. Right? So you have to actually take your points, weave it around sentences, and present it. So your presentation of your answer should be clear, concise. All your points should be there and the purpose of the question should be solved. These things you have to keep in mind. Right? Any question that you get of this type, what do you keep in mind? Ayan? What do you keep in mind when you are answering?
The main topic and the example.
And the purpose of the example. And your response should, what should it do? Most important.
Describe the example.
Describe the example. To do what? To answer the question. To answer the question. Yeah. So your explanation has to be directed towards what the question is asking. So that's where your development should be such that it solves, it is according to what the question is. Yeah. So the purpose of the task should be clear. Okay. Now we have another example. So ready for another one? Getting confusing? Tired of it? Yes, sir? No? Okay. So gear up for another one. So I will begin with reading the instructions and you know what to do. You will now listen to a part of a lecture. You will then be asked a question about it. After you hear the question, give yourself 20 seconds to prepare your response. Then record yourself speaking for 10 seconds. You will hear the lecture now. Ready?
It's always been one of those big sci-fi questions. Is there life on Mars? Or rather, could Mars ever support life? Well, it is generally assumed that in order to have life, you need water. Well, ever since the 1960s, we've been sending out probes to Mars to try to ascertain if there is water on Mars, or if there ever has been. And in the 1990s, 1996 to be precise, the U.S. Mars Global Surveyor was launched. The surveyor remains in orbit around Mars to this day and has some rather nifty equipment on board, including a high-resolution camera, a sensor which can identify soil and rocks, and a laser that can take measurements and map the planet's surface. So what have we learned from the Global Surveyor? Well, we found out that yes, there was once water on Mars, and in great quantities too. I'm talking oceans, seas, lakes, much like Earth today. They have deduced this because of the shapes of the mountains and valleys on Mars. They are the same shape as those formations on Earth that we know were created by water. In fact, some analysts are suggesting that there's still water on Mars to this day, but deep down, in holes 100 to 400 meters below the surface. This idea created quite a stir, as you can imagine, and a number of scientists have tried to either prove or refute this theory using other evidence available to us. Some Chinese scientists, for example, have been studying a meteor that was collected from the Antarctica in 2001, but they found no evidence of water there. But that's not to say that there isn't any water on Mars, as Mars and meteorites are separate entities entirely. Another source of evidence we have is images from astronomical telescopes. But we can't see much of the planet from this angle, just the poles, and they're covered in ice caps. Dry ice, not H2O. So that doesn't help us one way or the other.
So that was quite a bit of information. Were you able to get down something at least?
Yes.
Right? Arushi, what is the first point you got? Maybe you see there were quite a few points, right?
Yes.
There was a 1960s probe, 1996 global surveyor, then there was the Chinese scientists and the Antarctica meteor, and then there was the telescope. Yeah. So what did you write down about the first point?
I wrote sci-fi question Mars support life question mark. 1960s water is on Mars or has been there. 1996 US Mars Global Surveyor had a high resolution camera. Ma'am, I couldn't note down what all it had.
Yeah, that's okay. It has something to do with laser, even I can put it. So even if you say with a high resolution camera and
Laser
state
that
of
measurements and map.
Yeah. So what it did is important. Okay, now who will give me the next point? Details, Ayan? Details of this one? The global surveyor, what did it find?
1960.
No, that we've done. The next point.
Okay, in 1996, the US Mars Global Surveyor orbited Mars. It had a high resolution camera for photography rocks, a laser to map the topography of the Mars planet. Then after that, I wrote there was once water on Mars, lakes, seas, rivers, etc. They know this because of the impressions left, the mountains and valleys, the dry ones. Some scientists still say that there is still water below the surface of Mars, 100 to 150 meters below.
Okay. So, Shreyans, what is the next point? What did you write?
About the Chinese scientist who found a meteor in Antarctica and no water was found in it, but as meteors and Mars surface is different, so nothing can be deduced from that. And images from telescope, but only the poles are visible and which are covered in dry ice.
Right. Any point missing? Kesar, did you have any extra point?
That meteoroids in Antarctica was found in 2001
Okay.
and it doesn't contain H2O on the poles.
It contains?
Dry ice.
No. Are you mixing up the meteorite with the telescope?
No.
No? Okay. So the poles had dry ice. Right, that was it. So you got your points, everyone? Okay, now let's look at the question. Using information from the top, describe what we know about water on Mars and how we know it. So basically, you are just summarizing the entire lecture. So two things we had from the lecture, the source of information and what we know about it. Right? So you have to just summarize the whole thing and put it down. Right? So how will you summarize? The different sources, you can begin with that way. So the you can begin with the question of whether there is life on Mars. The lecture begins with the question of whether there is life on Mars and then goes on to various sources of information. That's what it is about. And then you can go on to firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, whatever. Here it is not just firstly, secondly, it is 4 main information sources. So organize your answer. Now here we won't say 2 examples. The professor gives us various sources. That's what your answer will be. You can begin with the lecture is about. Keep to the question. So anyone who is ready can let me know. Yes, sir. Are you ready? No? Okay, 5 more seconds. Organize your answer properly. Okay. Done? Done with your brainstorming on the answer? Arushi, can we begin with you?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please go on.
The lecture is about a major sci-fi question that whether Mars can support life. The professor uses examples to demonstrate. Firstly, uh, he talks about um, that in 1960s it was believed that there was water on Mars, or there is water on Mars, or had been water on Mars before. Then in 1996, a US Mars Global Surveyor was sent, which had a high resolution camera and laser to map the planet. Some analysts stated that there was still water on Mars because of the shapes of mountains and valleys which were created by water. However, some Chinese scientists refuted this by studying a meteor which was found in Antarctica in 2001. Uh, Mars and meteors are entirely different entities, and it did not help. Also, images from astronomical telescope showed only dry ice and not liquid water, which were also of no help.
So that was 1 minute 45 seconds. Yes, Arushi? Okay, now one thing let me tell you that I told you earlier also, you are expected to answer the question, right? So when I looked at the format or the template, what did I tell you? Here it's not talking about examples. What are they talking about?
What we know about water on Mars
And how we know. So we are talking about what we know and the source of information.
So we only have to talk about the shape of mount, like some analysts believe there is still water, and then the Chinese meteor, and then
No, you have to talk about this also. The 1960s, what they found. In 1996, what did the global surveyor find? Right? So those are the sources of information. What do we know? So the question now, these examples?
they are information.
Informations. So your question is about using information from the talk describe what we know and how we know. So the what and the how we have to get together. So simple, you just follow your notes from, so the professor talks about different sources of information from which have been trying to probe whether there is water on Mars. That's how you can begin.
Yes.
Yeah. And then go on to the various sources and summarize them. All you have to do is summarize them. What we know, that is from the global surveyor, what do we know?
That there was once water on Mars.
Yeah, there was once water and there was great quantity. How do we know? Because there was
Mountain and valley.
shapes of valleys and mountains. Next, we know about, and the added information is that there could be water on Mars. Later on, sources said, but it could be underground. And then we have the Chinese meteor, which was unconclusive, and then the astronomical telescope, right?
Yes.
These are, and if you summarize them properly, you can finish your answer in 1 minute. So the introduction need not be too long. Whether it's a qualify question or not, is that relevant to the answer to the question that is being asked? No. Not really. Yeah, we can. So now the important thing is whether you can segregate your information into important and not important. Your answer should contain important information which pertains to the question being asked. Right?
Yes.
So now you can formulate your answer better.
Yes.
You want to try it again?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, go on.
The lecture is about whether Mars can support life. The professor uses information to demonstrate. Firstly, in the 1960s, it was believed that there is more water on Mars or had been there before. In 1996, a U.S. Mars global surveyor with a high resolution camera and to, laser was sent. It was found that there was once more water on Mars due to the shapes of mountains and valleys. Some analysts stated that there is still water on Mars, but it may be underground. This was refuted by a Chinese scientist who studied a meteor in Antarctica, but it was inconclusive. Some images from astronomical telescopes were taken, but it only showed the ice caps and not liquid water, which were of no help.
So you have your information. Maybe, yeah, there is a lot of information, but it has to be summarized a little more. So your answer was 1 minute 17 seconds. Yeah, to be precise. So maybe okay, now Arushi, the beginning of your answer, how would you begin actually? Okay, wait, I'll come back to you. Let me see what others do. Okay, sir? Arushi has discussed it in details. All the points have been covered. Now I want your answer. Thank you, Arushi. Yes, you may begin. Yes.
The lecture is about whether Mars contains water or not. The professor uses in 1996, the US Global Mars Surveyor was launched, and Come, can I start again?
What happened?
Come, I messed.
You messed up? You forgot?
Yeah.
Okay. So keep an eye on the question. Before you begin, read the question once. The question is going to be on your screen while you answer. Yeah. So if you read your question, you will know exactly, okay, this is what I need. So your main thing is information and source. Okay, go on.
The lecture is about whether Mars contains water or not. Uh, in 1960, we didn't knew whether the Mars had water or not. But in
Yes, sir. Focus. Focus, go on.
no,
Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4 sources of information. What does each source say?
I have points, but I don't know how to start. Like the intro.
Your introduction was perfect. The
But
lecture
later,
is about water, whether there is water on Mars. Then,
yeah.
what is the question asking you?
How we know about yeah.
So,
But ma'am, then I'm thinking of like saying the US Mars Global Surveyor was launched in 1996, and using its high resolution camera, the scientists have figured out that the ocean, seas, and shape of the mountains are much similar of that on Earth. Then some studies on the meteoroid which landed in Antarctica in 2001. Uh, some studies were done on the meteoroid landed in Antarctica in 2001, but there is no such evidence of whether it contained water. And because Mars and meteoroids are separate entities, it is not yet it is not
it was not conclusive.
it was not conclusive.
Mhm.
Later images from the astronomical instruments were used, but scientists think that only the poles are visible from Earth, and poles contain dry ice and not particularly H2O. Therefore, we cannot conclude whether Mars contains water.
So, good enough. Few points here and there which were missing. So now if you see from each source, what do we know? That is how you have to frame your answer, right? Okay, let's see. Shreyansh, let's hear your answer.
Yes.
Yes,
The
please.
lecture is about whether Mars can support life or not. The professor gives some sources to uh, exemplify this topic. First, in the 1960s, scientists believed that there was water on Mars. In 1996, US Global Service launched a orbiter which orbits Mars to this date. It is equipped with a high resolution camera and a laser that measures and maps the Mars surface. Large amount of water is believed to be once there in Mars in form of big oceans and lakes. This is because the shape of mountains, which is the same as the mountains present in the Earth, which are caused by water. Uh, a Chinese scientist studied a meteor in Antarctica and found no water, but this was unconclusive. Images from telescopes, in which only the poles could be seen, were covered in dry ice caps, and and yeah, ultimately no conclusion can be drawn whether Mars has water on.
More or less, it was okay. Now you took 1 minute 27 seconds. Yeah. So now one thing you have, what can you do? Summarize a little bit. You don't need to mention details which are not answering your question. Whether it is orbiting till date, is that important?
No.
No. Yeah. Now, what is the main point from the Mars Global Surveyor data? Ayan, can you summarize only the Mars Global Surveyor data's findings?
Yes, ma'am. The US Mars Global Surveyor, it found that uh, when it scanned the planet, it found that the mountains and valleys were similar to oceans when they were dried up.
Mountains and valleys to oceans.
After the water dried up, what was
So the shapes of mountains and
shapes
valleys,
of
what did it show?
it showed that
There were
fast
large
waves and seas
volumes. It's talking about volumes of water, right? So Shreyans, another thing that you could have avoided, comparison to Earth, was it important?
No.
No. Yeah. So that can be omitted. What else can be omitted? So as Ayan pointed out, from Ayan's points, we would take what? That the 1996 US Mars Global Surveyor showed images which had a high resolution camera, that much you can say. And it gave us images which showed large valleys and shapes of valleys and mountains, which were proof that there could have been large amounts of water at some point of time. That's all you needed, right? Whether it is orbiting till date or not is not important to your answer. How it is mapping, that is also not very important. As long as you say that this was a source, it had a camera with high resolution, and this is what these are the images that it gave us. That is important. So the important information and the information which is not so important, you have to be able to segregate. If you go into two, now if you have 4 points, and the first point is going to take, so in 10 seconds, you are going to give your introduction. So here your introduction can be in less than 10 seconds also. Say 6 seconds in your introduction. Now you know your first point is going to take time. So, but still, now if you have 4 points and you have 50 seconds or say 40 seconds for each point, or say, okay, say if you divide into 15 seconds per point. First point maybe is longer, you give it 20 seconds. Second point you know is not too much. In 10 seconds, you can finish off with that. Third point, how much time? You actually have 3 main points. It begins with 1960s probe, but then your main point, the sources of information are the global surveyor, the Chinese meteor, and Chinese scientists on the meteor, and the telescope images of the poles. Yeah. So 10 seconds for the Chinese meteor, and say another 20 seconds for the poles and conclusion. The answer is done, right? But more than 20 seconds for a particular point, when you have 3 points to mention, you won't be able to finish your answer. So one last response from Ayan. So let's see, Ayan, can you implement all these strategies in your answer?
I'll try.
Yes, please go on.
The lecture is about a sci-fi question: is there life on Mars? The professor explains the question using water, because water is necessary for life. In 1960, the US sent probes to Mars to see if there was water on Mars. In 1996, the US Mars Global Surveyor program launched. It had a high resolution camera to take pictures of the rock and laser mapping to scan the craters and valleys of Mars. It discovered that there was once water on Mars because there were shapes of lakes and seas, rivers, etc. on Mars, which indicated that there was flowing or still water in some form or the other. Some scientists still say that there is still water below the surface of Mars, below 100 to 150 meters. A Chinese scientist started studying meteorites using images from telescopes. They had discovered that their poles had dry ice. But in summary, we still do not know if water exists below the surface of Mars in uh, in a liquid form.
Okay. So your answer was 1 minute 28 seconds. This was a tough one, right? To summarize. So now what did we learn? Do we need to use all the information? We don't need to use all the information. We need only important information which answers the question. What is your question? What we know about water on Mars and how we know it. So do we need to talk about the sci-fi question of whether there is life on Mars? Do we need to mention that? No. Right? That is not a part of our answer. What do we need to know? That the author talks, or the lecturer talks about whether there is water on Mars and gives various sources of information to explain it. That's it. That's all you need in your information. Sci-fi question, life on Mars, not required. Our question is about water. We have to focus on what the question. Now, you have a lecture, you have a lot of information, but the question is not asking you all the information. It's just asking what we know and how we know. So there was a lot of water at one point of now, that we know. How we know? From images of the Mars Global Surveyor, which was sent in 1996. Right? Even if you don't mention what type of camera, whether it took images of the rocks or the soil or the valleys or mountains, not very important. But it showed images of valleys and mountains, which proved that there was a lot of water at one point of time. That is important. So important information has to be segregated from less important information. So when you have taken your notes, you have to see, okay, what in this answers the question? Right? Those 20 seconds, your question is about water, not life on Mars. First thing. And what do we know about water? So in your notes, what do you know about water? There was lots of water at one point of time. There could be water 100 meters below. Yeah. There is no water on asteroids. And there is only dry ice at the poles. 4 things. So these are the 4 important informations. And what do you add to it? The source of information. That's it. All the other details are not required. So if you remove all the other details, you can finish your answer in 1 minute. So in any question where you have a lot of details and your question is not about every detail, you have to select the important points. If you select the important points, you are able to answer your question. Right? Let's see if there's something more here. Yeah, I think we have a sample also. Let's have a look.
The professor tells us that there was once water on Mars. There was a similar amount of water on the planet as there is on Earth now. We know this because of data retrieved by a probe which is in orbit around Mars. The probe was launched in 1996 and has been sending data back to Earth ever since then. It has taken photographs and measured the shape of the land so that maps can be drawn. From this information, scientists have been able to deduce that there was water there because the rock formations on Mars are similar to the formation on Earth that were formed by water. Some of those scientists believe that there's water on Mars even now, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence for this. Some studies have been done on a meteorite which landed on Earth in 2001, but there was no sign of any water there, although that doesn't mean there isn't any water on Mars, because Mars and this meteorite are not the same thing. We can also get pictures from astronomical telescopes, but they don't really help us ascertain whether there is water on Mars or not either, because from this angle we can only see the poles of Mars, and these are covered in dry ice. So, according to the lecture, we still don't know whether or not there is currently water on Mars.
Even this answer was about 15 seconds beyond the time limit. So, in this answer also, the speaker could have summarized the Mars Global Surveyor data a little more, right? So that could have saved 15 seconds. So your answer more or less would be directed towards whether there is water or not. Yeah, that is the main point. Now you people can answer this question and record yourself later on. That's it. So, what is it? How did you find task number 4? Difficult? It needs a little more practice, right? So what I'll do is, actually I wasn't able to find the file today. I will look for the file and share it with you. And in the meantime, you will go back to these tasks, all the questions that we did in class, do them again. See if you can get a perfect answer. Yeah, especially the last one. Answer it in such a way that you can fit your answer in 1 minute. Okay? And you will send me your recordings. Record yourself. Now, whether you are fitting into 1 minute or not, how will you know? And whether your answer is good enough or not, unless you record yourself and listen to it, you won't know. Right? So you will record yourself, listen to it, send me your recordings. So in our next class, we can discuss your recordings first before we move on to our next section. That will be your integrated writing, I think. Yeah, it will be your integrated writing section. Right? So whatever you record, whichever question you are doing, whether independent or integrated, task 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them, you will send me on WhatsApp. I want everyone. So I will keep note and then we will discuss. And we will learn from each other's mistakes. That's the only way we can improve ourselves. Like if Kesar did a mistake, then maybe you could have made the same mistake in another task. Right? Okay then. So that's it for today. Any doubts on this so far? Kesar has a clear no doubts. Arushi? Any doubts? No? Okay then. So make sure you practice. Give 5 minutes to the speaking section. Do at least 2 tasks. And 2 independent tasks every day you will do. Maybe next class we can begin with an independent task, a quick rapid round on it, and then move on to our writing section. Okay? So work on your strategies and we'll meet on today's Friday. We'll meet on Monday. Right? Okay, thank you everyone and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anushka ma'am.